Hey guys, Coldbrew here. Welcome back to another Raid Shadow Legends video. Today we're doing a showcase of nuker champions, with the exception of we want to see non-legendary nukers. We're going to talk about epics for each faction, and just to give you an idea of what I mean by nukers, I mean champions that can dish out big amounts of damage. I pretty much have leveled a good chunk of all epics in the game in terms of trying them out, making videos and all that. You can search them individually by name, at least for my channel. Any other channel has probably done it as well that has been doing content for so long. And just to give you an idea, look at Seer and what you can do if you properly set her up for the arena. She can act as a nuker as long as she's got, let's say, a defense down, as long as she's got good crit damage with the savage set. She can just boom and eliminate the whole wave. The bad thing about Seer is that she strips your whole team of buffs, and that's why people don't really use her as a nuker. But the possibility is there. You can actually go ahead and use her. But let's get started. All right, let's go into the index. Let's go and start with Banner Lords, and I'm gonna call out the non-voids first. And if it's only voids, if I'm gonna call a void as being the best nuker for that faction, I'm also going to try and call it a non-void just to give it an alternative. Let's say if you don't have something else. But here, luckily, even though we have a ton of epic heroes available for the Bannerlords, in terms of having a nuker champion, I would say that Horden, even though he's a single target nuker, he is one of the most solid ones you can do, and he is huge for the dark Fae encounter for the Doom Tower. So have Horden in your mind when you eventually get to the Dark Fae Doom Tower. He can be great in there. He can be very good as a single target nuker. Attacks one enemy 2 times, grants an extra turn if the target is killed. He's got a very strong A2. His multipliers are very solid because they're single target, and he also buffs himself up with an increased attack, increased critical rate buff, and an increased speed buff, which these are gear enhancement skills, in the sense of you need way less stuff to make this guy work. As long as you've got these buffs up, of course, you will need just 70% crit rate. You get the increased attack on your own, so you don't even need to have a champion that does that. If you don't have one just yet, let's say you don't have Arbiter, you go with this one. It's so good, and you're gonna see some good damage coming out of him. But the bad thing is that he doesn't do an AoE attack. But if you can manage to kill them with the A1, you get the extra turn, you get another one, and then another one. If it's 2 versus 4, you'll eventually get the win in arena. And the same thing goes for dungeons, really. So high elves, looking at high elves in terms of nukers, we don't have much here for the epics, the non-legendaries we're looking at. But I'm gonna say that Royal Guard is very solid in terms of dungeon nuking. His A2 skill, which does enemy max HP, is one of the best skills in the game. Second to Acresia, probably. Husk is lower than Royal Guard in terms of enemy max HP. This guy is very, very good for that. For the arena, I wouldn't go for Royal Guard and trying to see some high damage potential from Royal Guard. You can do Exemplar as single target damage dealer. Look at that, attacks 3 times at random, but she is not the best and most ideal nuker to do, at least from this faction. So it goes pretty much to Royal Guard. He's A2 skill is the nuke, and his A3 skill is the attacks 4 times in random. It's still solid, I'm gonna say, for this, but again, he'll be the more underwhelming champion to use as a nuker. Okay, going up next to Sacred Order. In terms of epics, we have a lot to choose from. And for nuker, what are we looking for? We're looking for that big burst that will give us the win. Unfortunately, from this, there's no clear-cut winner in terms of AoE damage nuker. But single target, I'm going to call out first the Void and then the non-Void. Since I said the Void one, it goes to Inquisitor Shamal, of course, because the Void one here does attacks one enemy 3 times, will ignore 25% of the target's defense, will ignore a further 25% for each buff on this champion. So with multiple buffs on Inquisitor Shamael, you're ignoring 100% of the enemy's defense, which can be huge for those high defense value targets. And that is why some builds on the defense teams go for high health rather than insane amounts of defense, just because of champions such as Shamael. All right, Shamael really goes through them with this skill right here, and it does have a short cooldown of 3 turns. In terms of AoE skills, we have Phoenix, who does have an AoE skill. This A2 does solid damage. The A1 and the A3 are single target, but the A2 does have solid damage. He is spirit though, so have that in mind depending on the enemy targets that you'll be facing, on how you'll be doing your damage. If you have a lot of magic defense against you, Phoenix will not do as well because of the weak hits. Then going up next, Barbarians. The Barbarians do have some epics that you can use more as support rather than anything else. But I will say that these sisters right here, Sikara, Alika, Kalia, all those have some good skills in them. Alika herself has an A1 that does get a 30% chance to get an extra hit. She always does crits on this skill on the A1. The A2 will ignore 50% of the target's defense if their max HP is greater than her, which is usually what happens when you're building up an attacker. And then she's got an AoE attack on the A3 with a 3-turn cooldown. The bad thing about champions like Alika is the big book requirement with 7 books, 6 here, and then another 7 here. I think they went a little bit overboard in terms of book requirements for a champion such as that. If you're not really looking for a nuker, okay, if you're really looking for a nuker, you go for Firekin, which is a great support, but he does miss out on damage, okay? So I'm just giving it as an alternative. Just use something else. If you really like a nuker, use something else and use Firekin in there just to give you that multiplier through the buffs. Barbarians really are lacking that big nuker who shouts out, yeah, use me, okay? Next up, we're going to go over to the Ogryn tribes. In terms of single target nuke, this goes to my boy Monitor with the A2 that has a very high multiplier. I've done a video showcase before of this one. He did, I think, over 200,000 on his A2 skill. That being said, not really used as a nuker. So we just skip ahead from that and we go over to Siege Hulk, where this boy right here does have a big burst and is a very solid champion to even use in faction wars if you really need a nuker. And as I said, the increased critical rate, increased critical damage buffs, these are needed as a booster to accounts that are missing the gear. If you're missing that crit rate, if you're missing crit damage, you use champions such as this, which boost themselves and then they do an attack. That really helps in getting through enemies. So Siege Hulk, great for that. A2 also very solid, since this is an AoE attack that also places a decreased defense debuff. So have that in mind. Very strong champion. There's many good ones in the Ogryn tribes in terms of single target. I'm gonna call out Occult Brawler as well, but I think this goes to Siege Hulk and the Manitor for the Void one that I had to call out, right? So we get it consistent. Then let's visit the Lizardmen. So Lizardmen does have a few epics that I would say, but the one I think that takes the win without any contest right here is Basilisk. Very strong A1 skill with a solid multiplier, and it's an AoE attack. And the A2 does have a stun, so that assists you in establishing control through a fight, with himself having a skill which revives him to 30% health when killed, and also placing a block damage buff. So if the enemy team doesn't have something like a block revive, they'll have a bad time facing the Basilisk team. All right. Then going up next to Skinwalkers. All right, going fast through this list, but I think you guys are following through everything so far. This one is a little bit rough in terms of nukers. I will say the single target goes to Fane, as she is the MVP for the Bat Eater comp. Single target, she works great. She does very high damage with the A2 and A3, which is a triple hitting attack. And she also applies some debuffs, poisons, all the good stuff that you're looking for a clan boss team. Works the same way in dungeons, but she does need a little bit more defense. In terms of AoE attacks, I think Basher can be used there as a solid nuker with this A 2 skill that is an AoE attack, which also increases cooldowns. But always with the nukers, you gotta get enough of all the other stats instead of the accuracy, which benefits Basher's A2 skill. So if I had a Basher, would I make him my nuker? Probably not. I would use him for control, use him for that A2 and lock out the enemy team, rather than using him for the damage potential, and then use maybe a rare that's more easily accessible, such as Kale or Aethel, and just try to think of something else. Going up next to Orcs, right? I just showed Seer at the start of the video, but Seer is, of course, the best nuker for Void. I'm not even gonna call out why Karma Burn is so good. You search Seer on YouTube and you see like hundreds of videos. I guarantee it. In terms of non-voids though, this goes to my girl Zargala. She is amazing. I will say she's one of my favorite champions to use in teams. At least she was way back in the day. Attacks all enemies 3 times after the first hit. 50% chance to place a decreased defense debuff on all enemies for 2 turns. Insane. Insane for damage potential. Not only that, her A2, if this one kills the target, she instantly activates the A3 again. Very solid and very unexpected damage coming out of her. If you can manage to get a kill with the A2, let's say after you use the A3, you do a nice cleanup with Zargala, and she's got very nice damage multipliers as well. Bad thing is, with all the epics, is that they need books, so you can't book every single one of them. It does take time. Demonspawn, let's have a look at Demonspawn epics. Goes to Magnar. No question about it. He is the HP MVP up until we had Empowerment. Empowerment made the legendary HP nukers much better because of all the extra stats that they get. Unfortunately, Magnar doesn't get that in the same way. He does do very solid damage with this extra hitting skill when he hits enemies without the HP burn. Very strong HP nuker, highly recommended to be used. But the problem with HP nukers is that they don't have any increased attack buff or an increased defense buff. So if it's a defense based nuker, you don't have those to benefit themselves. So you're really going for your strong gear to benefit your nuker and his good multipliers. If you got a good base of gear like a Savage set to give to Magnar, you'll see the damage difference that he can do in terms of other damage dealers. If not, then you'll be in a little bit of a trouble if you depended on that increased attack or increased defense for your nuker to do damage. You're gonna have some bad time. In terms of single target, you could go with Excruciator. She works nice, but single target has fallen off. So whenever I call out these champions, these are more used for going to maybe gold 4 in arena. After that, you're gonna face some reaction gears, reaction accessories, and you're gonna have a bad time. Plus all the stone skin. It's just insane on how much stone skin you see in arena nowadays. So going over to the Undead hordes for the epics, we of course don't have a void here, so we're just gonna call out the non-voids. We have Husk in terms of enemy max HP, but he's not the best nuker out of the lot. I'm just gonna call it. Just have that in mind. He's very good for Hydra, very good for the faction wars. But this goes to my girl Dark Elhain. Free to play, easily accessible to everybody. Get one leveled up, you will not regret it. She can be used against the Torments because of her passive skills, which instantly removes a freeze debuff, then buffs herself up with a ton of buffs, and then instantly activates, all right, instantly activates this A2 skill, which is called Death's Majesty skill, whenever this champion or an ally receives a freeze debuff. So these two passives work together, activates these, buffs herself up, and nukes the hell out of the enemies. Insane champion, very nice against champions that freeze. Even if you don't have that against you, she can still be used and have some fun in the arenas. Definitely try Dark Elhain out if you're looking for an AoE nuker. Okay, going over to Dark Elves, this opens up a little bit. In terms of nukers, I will say I had a little bit of a difficult decision here to make in terms of who can be a nuker. I don't have all the epics right now, but I did test some of them, and I think this goes out to my girl Luria here, who also has a block revive right here with the A2, attacks all enemies, can freeze and block revive. Insane potential out of just an epic. So if you don't kill them, you freeze them. If you don't freeze them, right, you still did a lot of damage to them. If you do manage to kill them, they won't come back. So very, very strong skill. Highly recommended to use one Luria. If you're missing one, then it's kind of sad, but what you can do as an alternative is probably go the more control route and not look for a damage dealer out of these epics for this specific faction. Just go heavy crowd control and then go for debuffs. So let's say go for Sylar. If you're looking for a nuker for the Dark Elves faction wars, you can even look at the rares and go for kill and all that. But remember, we're doing the epics. We're doing the epics. Let's go over to Night Rev. Night Rev, I will call out the difficulty with this one, with this specific faction. There's so many good ones that I'll talk about most of them. All right. Sinesha, very strong A1 skill, not the best, but works very well in synergy with the Void Skullcrown, who takes the lead here in terms of being the top damage dealer for this specific faction. Double hitting A1 and very strong A2, which also applies a weaken at a solid chance of 75%. Very strong epic, one of the OGs, has her own unkillable buff that she applies to herself and can even be revived. This Sinesha on the same team. Those two together work very, very well together. Have that in mind. In terms of non-void nuker, Thylesia can be very solid in terms of having an AoE skill, 3-turn cooldown. Low amount of books required on the A2. The other ones, though, do require a little bit higher amount of books. For single target, we have Faceless here with an insane A3, which ignores shield and block damage buff as well as defense. This just kills off those Valkyries in the faction wars. If you remember that wave, or if you don't know it, you'll know it. So Faceless does that. And then we have Kaitis, who is a very conditional attack-based nuker, who needs to drop to a very low amount of health to activate this skill, which does an attack that attacks all enemies twice, and damage increase according to the amount the HP of this champion has lost. Very, very difficult skill to activate, but when you do, it does do a good amount of damage and can do even higher amount of damage than other champions. So definitely a lot of options for the Night Revenant faction. Finally, we have 3 factions. Let's go over to Dwarves. The single target will go to Gala Longbraids because she can ignore target's defense when attacking under a shield buff, but the non-void nuker title will go to Filja. I love these 2 dwarves. I love the dwarves overall as a faction. I find them very interesting in terms of their skill sets, and it was one of the newer factions that we had when I started playing. The dwarves were the fun new thing that popped up right as I started playing. The first year I was playing was fun, and until we got the Shadowkin, a lot of time had passed. So this dwarf right here buffs herself up as a passive. It just needs to not have buffs at the start of the turn. She plays an increased attack and an increased crit damage buff on this champion for 1 turn. She can do a very huge burst on a single target and an AoE burst on her A3 skill. Very solid and highly recommended to try her out. Then let's have a look at Shadowkin. In terms of nukers, this goes to Genbo. My bow Genbo here, very strong. Again, as I said, increased critical rate, increased critical damage. This makes the teams work with less gear. Just go for it. You'll not regret it. Grants an extra turn. Then does the A2 skill. Very strong, unresistible effect that reduces buffs by 1 turn. Amazing champion. Is actually offered, I think, through the Amazon Prime thing in a couple of months, couple of weeks from at least the time this video is out. So have that in mind. In terms of non-voids, I'm a little bit confused on who I would use as a non-void nuker. I think Hotatsu is a solid defense nuker, but personally I didn't find him much interesting than just using Genbo. But Hotatsu is actually doable because he's a defensive based nuker. Those can always be nice because they're more more reliable in terms of surviving. They're not as squishy as attack-based nukers. Just have that in mind. And then finally, for Sylvan Watchers, I will say that I did have the chance to test out these ones a little bit. The rare I did like it. Nia as a void doesn't really have a burst, right? She's more of a buffer, so we're not even gonna call about the skills of her in terms of damage potential. But Ruella, very solid single target debuffer plus boss killer. You can use her. And Daithie, I believe, does have an AoE skill here. Has a 75% chance of placing a 60% decreased defense debuff and an extra turn mechanic on, I think, all of his skills, which is very weird. And I wonder how he would work with a Relentless set. So that being said, guys, this was the video. We've got 15 factions now, so these videos will be taking longer to do, and they might be more annoying than you're used to. But I do like to just refresh my thoughts on all champions whenever we have like a couple of new ones, which ones work the best. If you guys think any of them should be different, leave it down in the comments below for others to see. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next one. See ya.